I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 32 years old, and I never thought my own family would try to destroy me. That night at my grandfather Harold's estate, hidden behind the mahogany bookcase, I heard their voices plotting to steal my inheritance. Once we convince Harold she's abandoned the family legacy, my stepmother Vivian whispered, "Everything will be ours." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle my gasp. My own family was conspiring against me, and my beloved grandfather's multi-million-dollar literary collection hung in the balance. Before I dive into how this nightmare unfolded, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a like if you've ever discovered someone wasn't who you thought they were, and subscribe for more stories about family betrayal. Sweet, sweet justice. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. The Mitchells weren't just any Boston family. Since the 1922nd, we'd been fixtures in publishing, with my great-grandfather establishing Mitchell Literary Press during the Harlem Renaissance. Our brownstone in Beacon Hill housed first editions worth more than most people's homes, and our summer estate in Martha's Vineyard had hosted literary giants from Hemingway to Morrison. Growing up, I was the quiet bookworm who preferred the company of characters to people. While other kids had soccer practice, I had private tutorials on book preservation with my grandfather. Harold Mitchell wasn't just the family patriarch, he was my hero. After losing both my parents in a sailing accident when I was 16, he became my world. "Books endure, Cassie," he would tell me, his blue eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "People come and go, but what's written here," he'd tap the leather binding of whatever volume we were examining, "lasts forever." When I turned 18, grandfather surprised me by revealing I would inherit his personal collection, priceless first editions, signed manuscripts, and literary correspondence spanning a century. "You're the only one who truly understands their value," he said. Then came Vivian Reynolds, a widow 20 years my grandfather's junior, who swept into his life during a literary fundraiser when I was in college. Their whirlwind romance culminated in marriage just 6 months later. "She makes me feel young again," Cassie grandfather told me over the phone. I was happy for him, truly. After losing my grandmother a decade earlier, he deserved companionship. What I didn't realize was that Vivian came with baggage, her 2 children, Rachel and Derek, both in their 30s and remarkably unemployed until they mysteriously secured positions at our family publishing house. I was in New York at the time, building my career as a literary agent. My plan was to establish myself independently before returning to the family business. Every Sunday, I called grandfather and wrote him detailed letters about manuscripts I was working on, authors I was discovering. It wasn't until I returned for Christmas 3 years into Vivian's marriage that I noticed something odd. "Did you get my letter about the Vietnamese poet I signed?" I asked grandfather over eggnog. His brow furrowed. "Letter no, I don't believe so." Later that night, while searching for wrapping paper in Vivian's desk, I discovered a box of unopened envelopes, my letters to grandfather, dozens of them, their seals unbroken. Next to them, a folder labeled Harold's Correspondence contained drafts of responses to me in Vivian's handwriting, later signed in my grandfather's shaky hand. The shock felt physical, like ice water down my spine. She had been intercepting our communication, controlling what he knew about my life. When confronted privately, Vivian smiled tightly and said, "Harold gets confused by too much information. I'm simply managing his stress levels." By then, grandfather's health had begun its slow decline. Nothing serious, mild cognitive lapses, arthritis that made his hands tremble when holding his beloved books. But it was enough for Vivian to position herself as his caretaker, with Rachel and Derek increasingly handling the stressful business matters. 2 years ago, I made the decision to move back to Boston. I'd established my own successful literary agency in New York, but grandfather's voice had sounded increasingly distant on our calls that had become remarkably shorter and more supervised. "Mitchell Literary Agency is coming home," I announced at the family dinner celebrating my return. The tension around the table was palpable. "How?" quaint Rachel said, twirling her wine glass. "Though I wonder if you'll find the market rather saturated here." Derek laughed. "Don't worry, cousin. If it doesn't work out, there's always a place for you in the mailroom at Mitchell Press." From that moment, the battle lines were drawn. Every family weekend at the estate became an exercise in patience as Vivian, Rachel, and Derek undermined my every achievement and limited my access to grandfather. I watched helplessly as they ingratiated themselves further into his life and business. What I didn't know then was how far they were willing to go to cut me out completely. The morning after overhearing their plot, I entered the breakfast room with my heart pounding but face carefully composed. The Mitchell Estate's dining room with its walnut paneling and views of the Atlantic had once been my sanctuary. Now it felt like walking into a lion's den. "Sleep well, dear Vivian," asked her smile, not reaching her eyes. At 58, she maintained a carefully preserved beauty blonde hair, expertly colored fitness-sculpted body draped in cashmere. Like a baby, I lied, accepting coffee from Thomas, our longtime butler who'd been with grandfather for 30 years. Derek lounged at the table, scrolling through his phone. At 36, he possessed the effortless confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences. "Grandfather's having a slow morning," he mentioned casually. "Dr. Phillips adjusted his medication yesterday." My spine stiffened. Another medication change. That was the third in 2 months. Rachel breezed in, immaculate in designer casual wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Is that what you're wearing to the meeting, Cassandra?" she asked, eyeing my simple blouse and slacks. "Meeting," I echoed. Vivian placed her napkin in her lap. "Harold wants to discuss some business matters with everyone after breakfast." "I was going to mention it, but you seemed to turn in so early last night." Before I could respond, grandfather entered assisted by Thomas. My heart sank, seeing his shuffling gait, the slight fog in his once sharp eyes. At 84, Harold Mitchell had always maintained a distinguished vitality, silver hair, neatly combed posture, military straight mind, quick as ever. The man before me looked diminished. "Cassie," he said, genuine warmth breaking through as he spotted me. "You look just like your mother this morning." I kissed his papery cheek, noting how much thinner it felt beneath my lips. "Good morning, grandfather." The meeting turned out to be Derek's elaborate presentation on revitalizing Mitchell Press through a digital transformation that coincidentally would consolidate all operations under his direct control. "The current structure is too fragmented," he explained, clicking through sleek slides. "By streamlining management and folding independent entities back under the main company umbrella—" "You mean my agency?" I interrupted, seeing through his corporate doublespeak. Derek smiled thinly. "Mitchell Literary Agency is, of course, doing adequately in its niche market. But imagine the synergies if we brought everything together under unified leadership." "Harold, darling Vivian cooed, doesn't this make perfect sense, the Mitchell legacy preserved through modernization?" Grandfather frowned slightly, his fingers tracing patterns on the polished table. "What about Cassandra's authors? She's built relationships." "They'd all benefit from our expanded platform," Rachel jumped in smoothly. "Besides, Cassandra's little agency is hardly competing with the big New York firms she left behind." I watched stunned as they systematically dismantled my achievements, painting me as a failing businesswoman trading on the family name while positioning themselves as the saviors of grandfather's legacy. Throughout the meeting, I tried catching grandfather's eye, but Vivian remained physically at his side, touching his arm, refilling his water, helping him follow the conversation with leading questions. After the meeting, I attempted to speak with him privately, but Vivian intercepted me in the hallway. "Harold needs his rest. The excitement has tired him." 10 minutes, I insisted. "Dr. Phillips was very clear about his schedule," she replied, her voice honeyed steel. "Perhaps tomorrow." But tomorrow never came during that weekend. Somehow, grandfather was always resting on a call or engaged with Derek in urgent business matters whenever I tried to see him alone. On Sunday morning, I entered his bathroom to borrow toothpaste and noticed his pill organizer. Something seemed off about the array of medications. I'd helped grandfather with his heart medication for years before moving to New York, one small white tablet daily. Now the compartments contained multiple pills in various colors. Concerned, I photographed the medication labels with my phone, and later that day managed to bump into Dr. Phillips as he made his house call. Gregory Phillips had been our family physician for decades, but his demeanor had changed since Vivian entered our lives. Once grandfatherly himself, he now sported designer clothes, a Rolex, and freshly transplanted hair. Dr. Phillips, I'm concerned about grandfather's medication changes, I said directly after exchanging pleasantries. He seems increasingly disoriented. The doctor's smile turned patronizing. Your concern is touching Cassandra, but your grandfather's care is complex. Age-related cognitive changes. He was sharp as a tack 2 months ago, I interrupted. Before the new prescriptions. A flash of something annoyance guilt crossed his face. I'm afraid medical decisions remain between doctor and patient with Vivian's input as his healthcare proxy. Healthcare proxy. Since when? It's all properly documented, he said stiffly. Now, if you'll excuse me. As he left, I noticed him checking his watch, the identical model to the one Vivian had given Derek for Christmas. That evening, I walked the grounds to clear my head and spotted Dr. Phillips's car still parked in the side drive hours after his appointment should have ended. Curiosity drew me toward the garden pavilion where I heard Vivian's distinctive laugh floating through the open windows. Peering through the foliage, I saw them, Vivian and Dr. Phillips, intimately entwined on the pavilion couch, sharing wine and considerably more than medical consultation. I retreated silently, my suspicions crystallizing into certainty. This wasn't just about inheritance. They were systematically controlling every aspect of grandfather's life, possibly even endangering his health. That night, I called James Parker, my oldest friend, and a formidable attorney specializing in elder law. They're drugging him, James. I whispered into the phone from my car, too paranoid to speak from inside the house. I need to protect him, but I don't know how. Document everything, James advised. Get me proof of the medication changes, the forged correspondence, anything showing undue influence. And, Cassandra, be careful. People willing to drug an elderly man for money won't hesitate to deal with other obstacles. As I hung up, I realized with chilling clarity that in my family's eyes I had become exactly that, an obstacle to be removed. You'll need more than suspicions to challenge a healthcare proxy, James warned over coffee at a discreet cafe 3 blocks from my agency. We'd chosen the location carefully, far enough from Mitchell Press headquarters to avoid family spies, but public enough to prevent confrontation. I pushed my untouched scone aside. So I need to catch them in the act. James's expression was grim. Essentially, Massachusetts elder law requires substantive evidence of exploitation or undue influence. That afternoon, I called Zoe Warner, my assistant and tech wizard. At 25 with purple-tipped hair and 3 advanced degrees, she was the most loyal person in my professional life. We need surveillance, I explained in my office after hours, blinds drawn. Nothing illegal, but I need to know what's happening when I'm not there. Zoe didn't blink. I have a friend who designs security systems for museums. Ever heard of environmental monitoring cameras? They're disguised as ordinary objects designed to track temperature and humidity for artifact preservation. By Friday, when I returned to the estate for another family weekend, I carried what appeared to be an antique clock, a gift for grandfather's study with a nearly invisible camera embedded in its face. I also brought a first edition Fitzgerald that contained a secondary audio recording device. How thoughtful, Vivian remarked, as Thomas helped me carry the items to grandfather's study. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Though Harold rarely uses this room anymore, his eyesight makes reading difficult. That's why I thought he'd enjoy the clock, I replied smoothly. The chimes are reproductions of Big Ben. You know how he loves London? The devices were in place for less than 24 hours before capturing their first evidence. From my tablet in the guest room, I watched Derek enter grandfather's empty study with Vivian remove documents from the safe behind a painting of my grandmother and spread them on the desk. His signatures are getting too shaky, Derek complained, examining what appeared to be contracts. The bank questioned the last transfer authorization. Vivian extracted a folder from her designer tote. I've been practicing. See. She displayed several pages of my grandfather's signature progressively mimicked to perfection. My stomach churned as I watched her sign his name to multiple documents while Derek took photos of other papers from the safe. The next morning, I reviewed the audio recording and discovered Derek had returned alone, making phone calls to manipulate financial statements. We need the publishing division to show a 15% loss this quarter, he instructed someone named Martin. Move the Brennan advance to next quarter's books. Yes, I know it's already been paid. Find a way. When I accessed my grandfather's computer using the password I'd known for years, Fitzgerald1925, the year The Great Gatsby was published, I discovered dozens of emails he'd supposedly sent declining appearances at literary events I knew he'd have loved to attend. Most disturbing was a draft letter to his attorney requesting changes to his will, citing concerns about my financial irresponsibility and estrangement from family values phrases my grandfather would never use. During afternoon tea, Rachel deliberately knocked over her wine glass, sending burgundy liquid cascading onto a collection of letters between grandfather and Ernest Hemingway that we'd been examining. "Oh, how clumsy of me," she exclaimed, with practiced distress as the priceless correspondence absorbed the stain. I caught the slight curl of satisfaction at her lips as grandfather looked devastated these treasured artifacts damaged before his eyes. Later, while helping Thomas salvage the letters using conservation techniques, grandfather had taught me, I discovered a leather-bound journal tucked behind the display case. Inside, in my grandfather's increasingly unsteady handwriting, were concerning entries. June 15. Found myself in the East Wing today, unsure how I arrived there. Vivian says I agreed to move my bedroom downstairs, but I have no recollection of this conversation. July 8. The new pills make my thoughts foggy. Mentioned this to Gregory, but Vivian insists they're necessary. Miss my conversations with Cassie, she seems distant lately. Vivian says she's too busy with her agency to visit more often. August 20th. Strange dream that my books were being removed from the library. Woke to find several shelves empty. Derek explained they're being digitized for preservation. Why wasn't I consulted? The final entry, dated just 2 weeks prior, broke my heart. Something isn't right. I find myself confused about decisions I supposedly made. When I question them, everyone exchanges those looks, the ones that say, "Poor old Harold." Am I losing my mind, or is something else happening? That evening, I managed a rare moment alone with grandfather in the conservatory. His frailty terrified me. This man, who once commanded every room, now seemed diminished, uncertain. "Grandfather," I said, gently taking his hand, "are you happy with all these changes around the house? The medication adjustments?" His eyes, briefly clearer, met mine. "Something isn't right, Cassie. I feel lost in my own home." He lowered his voice. "I'm not supposed to have sweets anymore, doctor's orders, but I don't remember any such conversation." "What else don't you remember agreeing to?" I pressed gently. "The changes at the press. The new medications. This business with the will that Vivian keeps mentioning." His grip on my hand tightened. "I'm afraid to ask too many questions." When I do, the pills change and I feel worse. Our conversation ended abruptly when Thomas appeared with a strained expression. Miss Vivian is looking for you, sir. It's time for your medication. As grandfather shuffled away with Thomas, the butler glanced back at me meaningfully, his loyalty to grandfather clearly trumping any obligation to Vivian. Later that night, I nearly jumped out of my skin when Thomas knocked softly on my bedroom door. Miss Cassandra, you should know they've been in your room while you were swimming this afternoon. They searched my things, I whispered, horrified. Thomas nodded grimly. And there's more. I've been instructed to record which rooms you enter, how long you speak with Mr. Harold, and report directly to Miss Vivian. Are you telling me this because I've served your grandfather for 30 years, he said, simply. My loyalty isn't for sale. Before leaving, Thomas slipped me an envelope. This arrived yesterday. Miss Vivian set it aside to deliver later. Inside was an invitation that made my heart race. The Boston Literary Gala was honoring my grandfather with a Lifetime Achievement Award in just 3 weeks. An event Vivian had conveniently forgotten to mention. I called James from my car again that night, explaining everything I'd discovered. We're getting closer, he said, but still not enough to legally intervene. Keep gathering evidence and be careful. The fact that they're searching your room suggests they know you're onto them. As I ended the call, a text from Zoe flashed on my screen with a screenshot from the study camera. Derek was back at grandfather's desk, and this time he was holding a document clearly labeled Last Will and Testament. The week following my discoveries, the family's campaign to isolate grandfather intensified with frightening precision. Monday morning, I arrived at his home for our planned visit to the Athenaeum, a private library we'd frequented throughout my childhood. I'm sorry, Miss Cassandra, Thomas said, genuine regret in his eyes. Mr. Harold isn't feeling well this morning. Miss Vivian says he needs to rest. Through the partially open door of the sunroom, I glimpsed my grandfather reading the newspaper, appearing perfectly fine. I'll just say hello quickly, I attempted, moving toward the doorway. Vivian materialized as if conjured, blocking my path. Harold had a difficult night, she explained, voice dripping with concern. Dr. Phillips advised against any stimulation today. Reading the newspaper isn't stimulating, but seeing his granddaughter is eye-challenged. He gets confused when too many people make demands on his attention, she replied smoothly. Perhaps call ahead next time. By Wednesday, grandfather wasn't answering his personal phone at all. My calls went straight to voicemail, which was always returned by Vivian with various excuses. He's resting. He's meeting with Derek about business matters. He's having his therapy session. When I managed to reach him on Thursday by calling from a blocked number, his voice was alarmingly slurred. Cassie, is that you? The colors are very loud today. Grandfather, what medications did they give you this morning? I asked urgently. Blue ones. Pink ones. Vivian says they help me think clearly, but his voice suddenly became muffled and Vivian came on the line. He needs to rest now. I'll have him call you when he's more himself. At my agency, problems began mounting suspiciously. A major client received misinformation about contract terms from someone claiming to represent me. Another was told I was planning to close the agency and return to Mitchell Press. Derek Mitchell called me personally, my top author informed me when threatening to leave. Said I should secure new representation before you announce the merger next month. While fighting these professional fires, I received a call from our family bank. Miss Mitchell, we're confirming your request to be removed from the joint accounts you share with Harold Mitchell. I made no such request, I said, blood running cold. We have the paperwork here signed yesterday. Perhaps speak with your family about the confusion. That evening, I drove to the estate unannounced, only to find Dr. Phillips' car in the driveway again. Through a ground-floor window, I observed a scene that confirmed my worst fears. Grandfather barely conscious in his armchair while Vivian directed the doctor to administer an injection. "He's been asking too many questions," I heard her say. "The gala is in 2 weeks. We need everything finalized before then." The following day, Rachel called with news that would have once thrilled me. "The family is meeting with Walter Kimball tomorrow about streamlining the business structure," she said, referencing our longtime family attorney. "Harold specifically requested your presence." "Tomorrow I have client meetings all day," I replied, suspicious of the sudden invitation. "Cancel them," Rachel said bluntly. "Unless Mitchell Literary Agency isn't part of the family business after all." I rearranged my entire schedule only to arrive at Walter's office and find the meeting had been moved up by 2 hours. The family called to reschedule. Walter's assistant explained apologetically. "They said they tried to reach you." I burst into the conference room as they were concluding, finding grandfather slumped in his chair while Vivian efficiently gathered signed documents. "What's going on?" I demanded. Walter, who had known me since childhood, looked uncomfortable. "Cassandra, we've been discussing some simplifications to the Mitchell holdings. Given your grandfather's health concerns—" "What health concerns, specifically?" I interrupted. Derek smoothly interjected, "The same ones you'd know about if you weren't always putting your agency ahead of family obligations." Grandfather looked up at me with cloudy eyes. "Cassie, were we expecting you?" Vivian patted his hand. "You're confused, darling. Cassandra knew about the time change but had other priorities. We discussed this." Walter, sensing tension, gestured me toward the documents. "Perhaps you'd like to review what we've covered." The papers outlined a simplification, all right, transferring control of most Mitchell assets into a family trust managed by Vivian with Derek as successor trustee. My inheritance of the literary collection had been reduced to a minor footnote, with provisions for the collection to be managed by family consensus, effectively giving Vivian veto power over my grandfather's explicit wishes. "These changes are significant," I said carefully. "Grandfather, are you sure this is what you want?" Before he could answer, Vivian interrupted. "Harold and I have discussed this at length. Haven't we, darling? The doctor feels simplified affairs will reduce his stress." Walter cleared his throat. "I should note that I've expressed some concerns about the scope of these changes. I've suggested an independent assessment, which we'll consider after the gala." Vivian cut in. "Harold is so looking forward to his award. We wouldn't want to upset him with bureaucratic details beforehand." I left the meeting knowing I was running out of time. Whatever they were planning would culminate at the gala, an event where Boston's entire literary community would witness my grandfather's decision to restructure his legacy, effectively cutting me out. I waited 3 days to confront Vivian, methodically gathering evidence and consulting with James. The security camera had captured Derek tampering with grandfather's pills, replacing some with similar-looking tablets. Audio recordings documented multiple conversations about accelerating the transition before the gala. Saturday morning, I asked Vivian to meet me at the estate's garden pavilion, the same place I'd witnessed her tryst with Dr. Phillips. "What's this about Cassandra?" she asked, immaculately dressed in gardening clothes that had clearly never touched soil. "I have a charity luncheon at noon." I placed my phone on the table between us, displaying photos of the medication bottles with visible label discrepancies. "I know what you're doing to grandfather." Her expression didn't flicker. "And what exactly am I doing besides dedicating my life to caring for an elderly man with increasing needs? Drugging him, isolating him, manipulating him into changing his will." Vivian examined her manicure. "These are serious accusations from someone who abandoned her family business to play literary agent in New York, returning only when she realized her inheritance might be at risk." I built my career independently precisely because I didn't want to be accused of trading on the family name I countered. How convenient. Her smile turned predatory. Harold and I have discussed your motivations at length. He understands now why you've suddenly taken interest in his health. That's absurd. I've always been there for him. While you were networking in Manhattan, I was managing his medications, his doctor's appointments, his increasingly fragile emotional state. She leaned forward. Do you know how often he waited by the phone for calls that never came? You intercepted my letters, I said through gritted teeth. You controlled his access to me. I protected him from disappointment. She stood gathering her designer handbag. This conversation is over. I suggest you consider your position carefully. The changes to Harold's estate planning are nearly complete. There could still be a place for you in this family if you cooperate. Is that a threat? It's reality, dear. Harold is old and confused. Who do you think people will believe? The devoted wife who hasn't left his side for 5 years, or the absentee granddaughter? Suddenly concerned about her inheritance, she left me sitting there shaking with rage and fear, knowing her performance had been carefully calibrated. Vivian had been playing the role of devoted caretaker for years, establishing a public narrative I was now challenging at the 11th hour. I returned to the main house to find Derek in grandfather's study, ostensibly showing him quarterly reports. When I entered, grandfather looked up with an expression I'd never seen before, suspicion. Vivian tells me you've been making accusations, he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard recently. Had they adjusted his medication for this confrontation? Grandfather, I'm concerned about changes to your medication and your will. You haven't been yourself. Derek placed a protective hand on grandfather's shoulder. Cassie, we're all concerned about you. These conspiracy theories, secret recordings, it's not healthy. I froze. How did you know about the recordings? Derek smiled thinly. You just confirmed it. Grandfather looked genuinely distressed. You've been spying on me in my own home. Not on you, I insisted. I've been gathering evidence of how they're manipulating you. Evidence. Derek retrieved a folder from the desk. Like these emails we found on your laptop. My blood ran cold as he showed grandfather printouts of emails I'd supposedly written to a book appraiser discussing the potential value of his collection on the open market. These are forgeries, I said immediately. I never wrote these. They came from your email account, Derek countered smoothly. Grandfather was looking at me with growing distrust. You're planning to sell my collection after everything we've shared. Never, I insisted, kneeling beside his chair. Grandfather, they're setting me up. Those emails are fake. Rachel appeared in the doorway, her timing too perfect to be coincidental. Harold, she said gently, I hate to add to this unpleasantness, but you should also know. I overheard Cassandra on the phone yesterday telling someone you were losing your mind and would be easy to manipulate into giving her control of everything. That's an outright lie, I exploded, realizing too late that my anger played perfectly into their narrative of me as unstable. Grandfather's expression had completely closed off. I think you should leave Cassandra. Grandfather, please. Now, he said firmly, no trace of confusion in his eyes. I need time to think. Devastated, I retreated to my apartment in Back Bay, where James was waiting with more bad news. His investigator had discovered Dr. Phillips had been prescribing medications commonly used for dementia patients, despite no formal diagnosis in my grandfather's medical records. We're building a case, James assured me, but these things take time. Time is exactly what we don't have, I replied, pacing my living room. The gala is 10 days away. They're planning something significant there. When Zoe arrived an hour later, her expression told me something else had gone wrong. Someone broke into the office last night, she reported grimly. The security cameras were disabled, but they knew exactly what they were looking for. Your computer, the backup drive, with the surveillance footage all gone. I sank onto my sofa. They're always one step ahead. Zoe perched on the arm of a chair. There's more. Derek approached me yesterday, offered me double my salary to come work directly for Mitchell Press. He tried to poach you. No, he tried to bribe me to spy on you. Wanted me to report back on your calls meetings plans. Her expression hardened. I told him I'd think about it. I looked at her sharply. Double agent, she clarified with a tight smile. Thought it might be useful to feed him some misinformation. That night alone in my apartment, I hit rock bottom. My evidence was stolen, my grandfather had turned against me, and I was being systematically isolated from everyone who might help me. Curled on my bed, I allowed myself to cry for the first time since discovering their plot, wondering if I should simply admit defeat. The ringing of my phone jolted me from despair. An unknown number. Is this Cassandra Mitchell? A crisp British accent, elderly, but commanding. Yes. Margaret Winslow here. Harold's sister. We met when you were quite young. I've just arrived from London, and I believe we need to talk. Margaret Winslow swept into my life like a hurricane in Burberry. At 79, she possessed the ramrod posture and piercing gaze that had once been my grandfather's hallmarks before Vivian began drugging him. The family resemblance was striking: the same silver hair, the same penetrating blue eyes, the same unwillingness to suffer fools. I knew something was wrong when Harold stopped writing. She announced over tea at the Taj Hotel, where she'd booked the royal suite. My brother has written to me weekly for 60 years. Then suddenly his letters become short, generic, and eventually stop altogether. Nonsense. Vivian told everyone you were too busy traveling to visit, I explained. Margaret snorted. Convenient. I was in Brussels for an art exhibition, not circumnavigating the globe. She fixed me with a shrewd look. Now tell me everything. Leave nothing out. For 2 hours, I detailed my suspicions, discoveries, and setbacks. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound journal. This Dr. Phillips, she finally said. He's the same one who treated your grandmother. Yes. He's been our family physician forever, but he's changed since Vivian came into the picture. Margaret's expression darkened. Did you know Vivian approached my late husband Richard at a charity function in New York about 15 years ago? Before she met your grandfather, what? No. Quite the scene. Richard was significantly older than I, similar to Harold and Vivian's age gap. She made quite the play for him despite his wedding ring. Margaret's mouth thinned. When I confronted her, she claimed it was a misunderstanding. I thought nothing more of it until I saw her engagement announcement to Harold in the Times. I warned him, of course, but he was already smitten, I finished. Men of that generation have blind spots when it comes to certain types of women. Margaret tapped her pen against her notepad. Now I've taken the liberty of engaging my own attorney, Catherine Blake. She'll be joining us shortly. Catherine turned out to be a formidable presence in her own right, a former prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases. After reviewing my evidence, she was direct. They've been methodical, establishing a paper trail of Harold's supposed decline while isolating him from anyone who might notice the manipulation. Exactly what I've been saying, I agreed, frustrated. But they've made mistakes, Catherine continued. The medication changes without proper diagnosis. The suspicious timing of the will modifications. And most importantly, they got greedy. How so? Margaret asked. If they'd been content with smaller changes over a longer period, it might have gone unchallenged. But they're rushing everything to culminate at this gala, which suggests external pressure. Financial problems, perhaps. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard about the publishing division showing losses. Derek's been manipulating the company financials. They might be in worse shape than anyone realizes. A knock at my apartment door that evening revealed an unexpected visitor, Thomas, still in his butler's uniform. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, "but some things must be said in person." Inside, he revealed that he'd been documenting Vivian's activities for months. "I served your grandparents for decades. When your grandmother passed, I promised her I'd look after Harold. At first, I thought Miss Vivian brought him happiness, but then the changes began," I supplied. Thomas nodded grimly. The new routines, the restricted visitors, the medications. He produced a small notebook from his jacket. Dates, times, dosages. "I've recorded everything." "You've been spying for me?" I asked, astonished. "For your grandfather," he corrected. "And for your grandmother's memory." Most damning was a series of recordings he'd made using his phone hidden in his jacket pocket. One captured Vivian and Derek discussing their timeline. "Once the new trust is announced at the gala, we'll accelerate his decline," Vivian's voice said clearly. "By Christmas, he'll need full-time care, and we'll have complete control." "What if he fights it?" Derek asked. "He won't remember how," Vivian replied coldly. Thomas also confirmed my suspicion that grandfather's medication was being manipulated. They reduce his dosage when they need him lucid for public appearances or legal meetings, then increase it dramatically afterward, claiming the excitement exhausted him. Armed with this new evidence, Margaret orchestrated a bold move: morning walks in the garden with grandfather. "He and I always walked at dawn when we were children," she explained. "I've informed Vivian I'm continuing the tradition, and as his sister, I'd like to see her try to stop me." The first morning, grandfather seemed confused by Margaret's presence. By the third morning, with his medication wearing off during the night, glimmers of his old self began to emerge. "Something's wrong with me, Maggie," he confided, using his childhood name for her. "I can't hold on to my thoughts. Sometimes I can see clearly, like now, but then it all slips away again." "Harold," Margaret said gently, "I need you to listen carefully. Do you trust Cassandra?" He looked momentarily confused, then nodded firmly. "With my life? With everything." "Then you need to know Vivian and her children have been medicating you inappropriately. They're manipulating your health to control your decisions and your estate." I held my breath, expecting denial or confusion. Instead, grandfather straightened his shoulders in a flash of his old authority. "I've suspected something," he admitted. "There are gaps. Moments I can't account for. Documents I apparently signed." He gripped Margaret's hand. "Help me, Maggie. Help me protect what matters." The next morning, I joined their walk. When grandfather saw me waiting beside Margaret on the garden bench, his eyes filled with tears. "Cassie, they told me you were trying to sell my books." I knelt before him. "Never, grandfather. I would never betray what we've built together." He cupped my face in his trembling hand. "I believe you. Even when my mind clouds in my heart, I know you." That moment of connection nearly broke me. For weeks, I'd been fighting not just for his inheritance, but for his autonomy, his dignity for him. "We have a plan," I told him, "but we need to be careful. They're watching everything." "The gala," he said, surprising me with his clarity. "They're planning something for the gala." "Yes." "How did you know?" His eyes hardened. "I may be drugged, but I'm not deaf. Vivian practices her speeches when she thinks I'm sleeping." A flash of my grandfather's legendary determination showed through. "Whatever they're planning, we'll be ready." As we finished our walk, we spotted Vivian watching from an upstairs window, her expression unreadable behind the glass. The battle lines had been redrawn. With Margaret's arrival, Thomas's evidence, and Catherine's legal expertise, we finally had a fighting chance. But Vivian had spent years building her web. And as we were about to discover, she wasn't about to let her prize escape without a vicious fight. "The Boston Literary Gala gives us one significant advantage," James explained as we gathered in Margaret's hotel suite. "Public scrutiny. Our war council consisted of Margaret Catherine Thomas on his day off, James, Zoe, and myself. The suite sitting room had been transformed into an operations center, with timelines, medication charts, and legal documents covering every surface. Vivian's strength lies in controlling the narrative in private, Catherine agreed. But at the gala, with hundreds of witnesses from Boston's literary community, she'll still have control of grandfather's medication, I pointed out. She could ensure he's completely disoriented that night. Margaret tapped her fountain pen against her notepad. Not if we have an independent medical evaluation immediately beforehand. Catherine nodded. I've secured a court order for a geriatric specialist to examine Harold, citing concerns about his rapidly changing condition. Vivian will fight it, I warned. She can try, Catherine replied with steel in her voice. But legally, she'll be in contempt if she refuses. James continued, the evaluation is scheduled for 3 hours before the gala. Dr. Lowell is one of the country's foremost experts on elder cognition, and I've arranged for her to attend the gala as my +1, Margaret added with a satisfied smile. Convenient, isn't it? While the legal team worked on protecting grandfather, Zoe had been investigating the financial angle. She spun her laptop toward us, displaying spreadsheets. Mitchell Press is in serious trouble, she explained. Derek has been hiding losses for at least 2 years. They're leveraged to the hilt, and 3 major loans come due next month. Which explains the rush, I realized. They need control of grandfather's personal assets to cover the company's debts. Precisely. And there's more. Zoe clicked to a different screen. Vivian's planning to announce a generous donation from Harold's estate to establish the Mitchell Literary Foundation at the gala. What foundation? I asked, bewildered. The one that doesn't exist yet, Zoe replied dryly, but will conveniently be managed by Vivian and Derek with the family's rare book collection as its primary asset. The scheme was becoming clear. They would publicly announce the foundation as grandfather's legacy, making it nearly impossible to contest without appearing to dishonor his wishes. We need to control some aspect of the gala program, I mused. Zoe, can you get me on the speaking schedule? Zoe grinned. Already done. I may have mentioned to the organizing committee that Harold specifically requested you introduce him. They believed you. I had Thomas corroborate it, she explained with a wink toward the butler. Thomas cleared his throat. I merely confirmed that Mr. Harold has always been adamant that Miss Cassandra represents his literary legacy. Our plan began taking shape. Catherine would handle the legal intervention, ensuring Dr. Lowell could examine grandfather. Margaret would run interference with Vivian during the pre-gala reception. James would document everything from a legal perspective. Zoe would monitor Derek and Rachel. And I would prepare a speech that would make it impossible for Vivian to move forward with her scheme. The night before the gala, Rachel made a desperate attempt to remove me from the equation entirely. She called my top 3 authors, informing them I'd been let go from my own agency due to ethical concerns. By morning, the rumor had spread throughout Boston's literary community that Cassandra Mitchell was finished professionally. 2 authors had already called to terminate our contracts. It's a smart move, James admitted when I called him in a panic. If you're professionally discredited, your objections to the foundation will seem like sour grapes. Then we need to discredit their narrative before they can establish it, I replied, an idea forming. I spent the day calling every editor, publisher, and author in my network, transparently explaining the situation. My family is attempting a hostile takeover of Mitchell Literary Agency. If you hear rumors about me today, please reserve judgment until after tonight's gala. Most promised to wait before making any decisions. Literary Boston had known me since childhood, after all. My reputation couldn't be dismantled in a single day. As evening approached, our final preparations were interrupted by an urgent call from Thomas. They've changed Mr. Harold's medication again, he reported, voice tight with concern. Dr. Phillips arrived an hour ago with new pills. Miss Vivian is administering double the usual dose. They're making sure he's completely incapacitated for the gala, Margaret realized alarm in her voice. Can you intervene? I asked Thomas desperately. I've tried, he replied. She's supervising each dose personally. But, his voice lowered. I might be able to switch the evening dose if I can access her medication kit. Be careful, I warned. If she catches you, some risks are worth taking, Miss Cassandra, he replied simply. As I hung up, Catherine entered with more concerning news. Derek filed an emergency motion contesting our court-ordered evaluation, claiming it would distress Harold unnecessarily before his big night. Can they block it? They're trying. The judge is reviewing it now. Catherine's expression was grim. We need a backup plan if the evaluation gets delayed. Margaret straightened her pearls, a determined glint in her eye. Then we proceed without it. Harold and I have weathered worse than Vivian Reynolds. As we prepared to leave for the gala, Zoe rushed in with a folder. You need to see this immediately. Inside were financial documents showing that Vivian had already transferred ownership of several valuable first editions from grandfather's collection to offshore accounts. She's been selling off pieces of his collection, I asked, horrified. Worse, Zoe replied. She's been using them as collateral for loans to prop up Mitchell Press. If Harold contests the foundation, those books could be seized by creditors. The stakes had just gotten exponentially higher. This wasn't just about my inheritance anymore. It was about preserving a literary legacy my grandfather had spent his life building. We need to adjust our strategy, I said, a new resolve hardening within me. Vivian's not just manipulating grandfather, she's already pillaging his collection. We can't wait for the legal system to catch up. What are you suggesting? Catherine asked, cautiously. I met each of their gazes in turn. Tonight, we don't just defend, we expose. Everything. Publicly. James looked concerned. Cassandra, that's risky. Without the medical evaluation, we have Thomas's records, we have the financial documents, and most importantly, I added, picking up my handbag, we have this. I pulled out a small thumb drive. Every recording of Vivian and Derek discussing their plans edited into a concise 3-minute video, including explicit mentions of drugging grandfather. When did you, Margaret began. Last night? Zoe and I worked until dawn. Margaret's smile was slow and approving. You are definitely a Mitchell. As we prepared to leave for the gala, my phone chimed with a text from Thomas. Mission accomplished. Placebo substituted for evening dose. Be prepared for anything. My grandfather would be attending the gala with a clear mind for the first time in months. Whether that would save or doom us remained to be seen. The Boston Public Library had been transformed into a literary wonderland for the gala. The historic McKim building glowed with soft lighting, its vaulted ceilings and marble arches, creating a cathedral-like atmosphere for the city's bibliophiles. Rare manuscripts were displayed in glass cases, while quotes from famous authors adorned banner displays hanging between ornate columns. I arrived early with James, scanning the growing crowd for familiar faces. Boston's literary elite mingled with publishers, editors, and benefactors, all in formal attire befitting the black tie occasion. Remember, James murmured, stick to the plan. No confrontations until we have grandfather secured. Zoe joined us stunning in a midnight blue gown, her usual purple-tipped hair now styled elegantly. Derek and Rachel just arrived. No sign of Vivian or your grandfather yet. My heart pounded as I watched the main entrance. Everything hinged on grandfather's condition when he arrived. If Thomas had successfully switched the medication, we had a chance. If not, Cassandra Mitchell. A booming voice interrupted my thoughts. Bernard Whitaker, head of Boston University's English department and an old friend of grandfather's, approached with a concerned expression. Heard the most distressing rumors about you today. Something about ethical violations. I forced a smile. All part of a family misunderstanding that will be clarified tonight, Bernard. I hope you'll reserve judgment until then. He studied my face intently before nodding. Known you since you were reciting Wordsworth at 8 years old. Never believed it for a minute. As he moved away, I spotted them, Vivian, entering on grandfather's arm, with Derek and Rachel flanking them like guards. My breath caught in my throat. Grandfather was impeccably dressed in his favorite tuxedo, but his movements seemed mechanical, his expression vacant. Vivian guided him through the crowd, accepting congratulations on his behalf with practiced grace. He doesn't look good, Zoe whispered. The earlier doses, I replied grimly. Thomas only managed to switch the last one. Margaret appeared at my elbow, resplendent in emerald green. Dr. Lowell is here. She's observing from the west alcove. I glanced over to see an elegant woman in her 60s watching grandfather with professional interest. What about the court order, I asked. Denied, Catherine replied, joining our group. The judge ruled it would cause unnecessary distress before the ceremony. I swallowed hard. Then we proceed with Plan B. For the next hour, I circulated through the crowd, observing as Vivian kept grandfather contained within a small circle of people, all known friends of hers. Whenever anyone from his old literary circle approached, Derek or Rachel would smoothly intercept them. Several colleagues approached me with concerned expressions, having heard the rumors about my professional downfall. I reassured each one that all would be explained during the ceremony. During the cocktail reception, I managed to briefly catch grandfather's eye across the room. For a moment, there was no recognition, then a flicker of awareness quickly extinguished as Vivian steered him away. The earlier medication is still in his system, Dr. Lowell confirmed when I reported back to our group. But if the last dose was replaced, as you say, he should begin gaining lucidity over the next hour. The presentation is in 90 minutes, Margaret noted, checking her vintage Cartier watch. Then we need to separate him from Vivian before then, I decided. Our opportunity came during dinner. The seating chart had placed grandfather at the head table with Vivian, Derek, Rachel, and the gala organizers. I was relegated to a table near the back, Vivian's doing no doubt. But Thomas, working as part of the catering staff for the evening, had made a crucial adjustment to the place cards. As guests found, their table's confusion erupted at the head table. There seems to be a mistake, Vivian was saying to the flustered event coordinator. Harold and I should be seated together. The final chart shows Dr. Mitchell seated between the library director and his granddaughter, the coordinator replied, consulting her tablet. That's impossible. I reviewed the seating myself yesterday. While Vivian argued, I smoothly took my assigned seat beside grandfather. Evening, grandfather, I said casually, as if nothing were amiss. He turned to me, his eyes still clouded but with recognition dawning. Cassie. The very same, I replied, squeezing his hand under the table. Vivian arrived furious but constrained by social propriety. There's been a mix-up with the seating, Harold. I'll have it corrected immediately. No need, the library director intervened. We're about to begin dinner. Best not to disrupt things further. Vivian was forced to take her reassigned seat at the far end of the table, her expression murderous. Throughout the first course, grandfather remained mostly silent, occasionally looking confused. By the main course, however, I noticed his eyes beginning to clear, his posture straightening incrementally. How are you feeling? I asked quietly, as servers cleared our plates. He turned to me, and for the first time in months, I saw my real grandfather looking back at me. Like I'm waking from a very long, very strange dream, he murmured. Grandfather, I need you to listen carefully. Vivian has been drugging me, he finished, his voice low but firm. I know, Cassie. Not always, not constantly, but enough that I couldn't trust my own mind. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. There have been moments of clarity. Moments when I remembered who I was, what matters to me. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. We're going to fix this. Tonight. He nodded almost imperceptibly. I saw the video you made. Thomas showed me this morning during a brief window of clarity. I stared at him, shocked. Thomas showed you. Did you think he was working only for you? Grandfather's eyes twinkled with a flash of his old humor. He's been my friend for 30 years, Cassie. Before I could respond, the library director rose to begin the awards presentation. Vivian immediately moved toward our table but was intercepted by Margaret, who accidentally spilled champagne on her dress, necessitating an emergency trip to the ladies' room. The first hour of presentations felt interminable. Various literary achievements, recognized donations, announced speeches given. Finally, the moment arrived. And now to present our Lifetime Literary Achievement Award to Harold Mitchell, I'm pleased to welcome his granddaughter, Cassandra Mitchell. I approached the podium heart-hammering. The speech I'd prepared seemed inadequate now. Looking out at the sea of faces, colleagues, mentors, friends, I made a split-second decision to speak from the heart instead. My grandfather taught me that books are more than paper and ink, they're vehicles of transformation. When I was 8 years old, he placed a first edition of Little Women in my hands and said, "Inside these pages, you'll find yourself." He was right. I continued weaving personal anecdotes with grandfather's contributions to publishing, watching as he sat straighter in his chair, his expression growing more alert by the minute. The Mitchell legacy isn't about business or buildings or even books themselves, it's about stories. The stories that connect us across time and space, that help us understand what it means to be human. As I spoke, our prearranged signal was executed. Thomas discreetly handed tablets to key literary figures around the room, editors from major publishing houses, presidents of literary foundations, longtime friends of my grandfather, each displaying the video evidence of Vivian and Derek's machinations. I concluded my speech as planned. It is my honor to present this award to the man who taught me that literature isn't just something we read, it's something we live. Ladies and gentlemen, Harold Mitchell. The applause was thunderous as grandfather rose from his seat, moving with increasing steadiness toward the podium. Vivian, having returned from the ladies' room, watched with growing apprehension as he climbed the steps without assistance. When he reached the microphone, he stood silent for a moment, surveying the room. The audience grew quiet, expectant. I had a speech prepared, he began, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. Or rather, a speech was prepared for me. He removed folded pages from his pocket and placed them aside. But I find I have other words to share tonight. He straightened to his full height, and suddenly the Harold Mitchell of old stood before us, commanding, incisive, formidable. For the past year, I have been subjected to a systematic campaign to undermine my health, my mental capacity, and my autonomy. My medication has been manipulated, my correspondence controlled, my relationships severed. Gasps rippled through the audience. Vivian half rose from her seat, panic flashing across her face. Tonight, thanks to the diligence of my granddaughter Cassandra, my sister Margaret, and loyal friends, I stand before you with a clear mind for the first time in many months. As he spoke, the video evidence was being viewed around the room on the distributed tablets. Murmurs of shock and outrage grew as attendees witnessed Vivian and Derek explicitly discussing their plans to drug him and seize control of his assets. I am officially announcing that effective immediately, I am revoking all powers granted to Vivian Mitchell and her children regarding my personal, medical, and financial affairs. Vivian was now on her feet. Harold, you're confused. This is exactly what we feared, Cassandra manipulating you during a vulnerable moment. Grandfather's gaze, when it landed on her, was arctic. I have never been more clear-headed, Vivian. And I have never been more disappointed in my own judgment. He turned back to the audience. The Mitchell Literary Collection, which my family has curated for generations, is not for sale, not for leveraging, and certainly not for exploitation. As has always been my intention upon my death, these treasures will pass to my granddaughter Cassandra, who will establish the legitimate Mitchell Literary Foundation to preserve public access to these works. Derek stood now too, attempting damage control. Ladies and gentlemen, we're witnessing exactly why we've been concerned. My stepfather's condition has been deteriorating for months. These conspiracy theories are thoroughly documented, interrupted Dr. Lowell, rising from her seat. As a geriatric neurologist who has been observing Mr. Mitchell this evening, I can state professionally that he is displaying none of the cognitive impairments consistent with the diagnosis used to justify his medication regimen. The room erupted in confusion. Rachel, sensing the turning tide, quickly distanced herself from her mother and brother, moving to sit with colleagues from the publishing house. Vivian made one last desperate attempt. Harold has been unwell. Ask anyone who spent time with him recently. Ask Dr. Phillips. Dr. Phillips, Catherine announced, stepping forward, has just been served with a subpoena regarding his prescribing practices and potential medical ethics violations. It was over. As security discreetly approached, Vivian and Derek grandfather completed his speech with dignity. Tonight, we celebrate literature, the written word that connects us across time and space. I am profoundly grateful for this recognition and even more grateful for the truth that has finally emerged. Thank you. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. In the weeks following the Boston Literary Gala, the aftermath unfolded with a swiftness that left the literary community reeling. What the newspapers dubbed the Mitchell literary scandal dominated conversation at every book launch and publishing event in the city. The morning after the gala, Boston's literary elite rallied around grandfather with stunning solidarity. Bernard Whitaker organized an emergency meeting of department heads from 5 universities publicly denouncing the unconscionable elder abuse perpetrated against one of Boston's literary treasures. Dr. Phillips surrendered his medical license rather than face a full investigation. The Massachusetts Medical Board issued a statement condemning the gross violation of the Hippocratic Oath through the intentional misuse of medication for financial gain. Vivian and Derek faced more severe consequences. With the evidence gathered by Thomas, Catherine secured emergency protective orders barring them from contacting grandfather or accessing any Mitchell properties or accounts. Criminal charges for elder abuse and financial exploitation followed, with additional investigations into securities fraud related to Mitchell Press's finances. Rachel, in a surprise move, approached Catherine privately with an offer to testify against her mother and brother in exchange for immunity. They kept me in the dark about the worst of it, she claimed tearfully. I knew they were isolating Harold, but I never knew about the medication tampering. Whether her ignorance was genuine or strategic, her testimony proved invaluable in building the case against Vivian and Derek. Grandfather's recovery, once freed from the inappropriate medication, was remarkable. Within days, his mental clarity returned completely. The fog that had enveloped him for months lifted, revealing the sharp, perceptive man who had built a publishing empire. It was like being trapped in my own mind, he confided one evening as we sorted through manuscripts in his study. I could see what was happening sometimes, but couldn't fight through the haze to stop it. The hardest part for him wasn't the betrayal, but the time lost. Months of my life, Cassie. At my age, that's precious time I'll never recover. We channeled that pain into purpose. Together, we restructured Mitchell Press, bringing in new management and implementing transparent financial practices. The publishing house had suffered under Derek's mismanagement, but its foundation remained sound. I maintained my independent literary agency while taking a board position at the press, creating the balance I'd always sought, honoring the family legacy while preserving my professional independence. The most meaningful project, however, was the True Mitchell Literary Foundation. Unlike Vivian's fraudulent version, ours focused on preservation and access. We established a reading room at the Boston Public Library where scholars could study the rare manuscripts and created fellowships for emerging writers from underrepresented backgrounds. "This is how legacy should work," Grandfather said during the Foundation's official launch. "Not hoarded, but shared. Not weaponized, but utilized for growth." Perhaps most healing was the book we began co-authoring, part family history, part meditation on literature, part cautionary tale about the exploitation of vulnerable elders. The writing process became a form of therapy, allowing Grandfather to reclaim his voice and me to process the trauma of nearly losing him. "Words saved us," he remarked one afternoon as we reviewed chapter drafts on the terrace overlooking the Atlantic. "Quite fitting for a family of publishers, don't you think?" Some family relationships were irreparable. Vivian, awaiting trial, maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Derek, facing additional charges for financial fraud, attempted to cut a deal by implicating his mother further. But others found healing. Rachel, after extensive therapy, made halting attempts at reconciliation. Several cousins from distant branches of the family tree who had maintained their distance during Vivian's reign reconnected with warmth and support. Thomas, whose loyalty had proven invaluable, was promoted from butler to house manager, though he still insisted on personally serving Grandfather's morning tea for old time's sake. Margaret extended her visit indefinitely, taking a suite at the estate rather than returning to London. "Siblings should stick together in their dotage," she announced. "Besides, someone needs to ensure you don't fall for another gold digger, Harold." 1 year after the gala, we hosted our own literary event at the restored family estate. The gardens were strung with lights, tables adorned with first editions, protected in clear cases, serving as centerpieces. Boston's literary community gathered once again, but this time in celebration rather than unwitting witness to exploitation. Grandfather, now 85, but vibrant and engaged, moved through the crowd with ease, discussing manuscripts and memories with equal enthusiasm. His health continued to improve under proper care, his mind sharp as ever. As the evening wound down, he took the small stage we'd set up near the rose garden, tapping his glass for attention. "A year ago, I stood before many of you, a man half present in my own life," he began. "Tonight, I stand before you whole again, thanks to the courage and persistence of my granddaughter Cassandra." He gestured for me to join him, and I moved to his side, emotion tightening my throat. "The true inheritance we pass along isn't measured in dollars or even in rare books," he continued. "It's measured in the stories we tell, the truths we defend, and the love that compels us to fight for each other even when the odds seem insurmountable." He raised his glass. "To stories, the ones on our shelves, and the ones we live every day." Later, as guests departed and the night grew quiet, I found myself alone in the library with Grandfather. He was examining a first edition Dickens, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Was it worth it?" I asked softly. "All the pain, the public exposure, the family fracturing." He looked up, considering the question with the thoughtfulness that had always defined him. "Truth usually exacts a price, Cassie. But living a lie costs far more in the end." He closed the book gently. "Besides, we, Mitchell women, have always been formidable. Your grandmother would have been extraordinarily proud of you." As I helped him up to retire for the evening, I reflected on how close we had come to losing everything that mattered, not just the inheritance, but the man himself, his dignity, his agency, his mind. In fighting for his legacy, I had rediscovered my own heritage, not the books or the business, but the courage to stand firm against corruption, even when it wore a familiar face. Some battles are worth fighting, not for what you gain, but for what you refuse to lose. Have you ever had to stand up against family members who weren't acting in everyone's best interest? Or discovered someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed this story of family betrayal and justice. Subscribe for more real-life stories, and hit that share button to spread the word about elder abuse awareness. Remember, sometimes the people who should protect us the most are the ones we need protection from. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always find the courage to defend what matters most in your own life.